I went to my parents' retirement party, and just as I reached for the door, I heard my sister snort, "Here comes Miss CEO with zero social skills. Let's just pretend we're busy." My cousin added, "She only talks in PowerPoints anyway." I waited a beat, walked away, and booked a flight out that same night. What I did next? They begged me to undo. I guess I should start by saying I never expected to be that person, the one who cuts their family off, the one who lets a grudge dictate their actions. But when you spend most of your life chasing approval that never comes, and then you hear your own flesh and blood mocking you like you're some alien in a suit, well, something breaks. Something deep. The day of my parents' retirement party was hot, even for a California spring. The sun baked the lodge's wide wooden decks, and laughter drifted out from the open windows. Kids shrieked somewhere near the water. I had flown across the country for this. I had rescheduled meetings, canceled a major presentation, and actually bought casual clothes, sneakers, jeans, a soft blue cardigan that didn't scream corporate. The bouquet in my hand was trembling slightly. Whether from nerves or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. As I reached for the door, voices floated toward me. My sister, Daphne, and our cousin Nolan. They didn't know I was there. They didn't know I could hear everything. "Here comes Miss CEO with zero social skills. Let's just pretend we're busy," Daphne said, her voice edged with glee. "She only talks in PowerPoints anyway," Nolan replied, and I heard them both laugh. I froze. My fingers never even touched the handle. There was a long beat where I could have made a choice. I could have walked in. I could have smiled like I didn't hear. I could have confronted them. Instead, I turned around and walked away. It felt almost mechanical. Down the steps, through the parking lot, back to my rental car. I sat behind the wheel, the bouquet tossed onto the passenger seat, and stared out the windshield as my mind raced. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, I was sitting in the Fresno airport with a $400 one-way ticket back to Chicago. No suitcase checked. No goodbyes. My phone buzzed nonstop as I waited to board. Voicemails from my mom, cheerful at first, then puzzled, then worried. Messages from Dad. Even a few from Daphne, pretending not to know why I had left. I didn't answer a single one. By the time I landed back in Chicago, I had already made my decision. I was done playing the part of the dutiful daughter who swallowed everything just to keep the peace. But the story didn't end there. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks later, after dozens of ignored calls and messages, my parents finally sent an email, a long one. It was filled with apologies and confusion. They tried to explain that Daphne and Nolan were just joking and that I should have stayed. They admitted the party was awkward without me, that the donation I had organized had been presented without context, and that my absence had left an embarrassing gap in the evening. They didn't ask me what I needed. They asked me to fix it. And that's when the idea took root. Years ago, before I became the so-called Miss CEO, my parents had asked me to help with their estate planning. I had dutifully signed documents, co-signed on certain accounts, helped establish a living trust for their assets. Ranch house, vacation property, retirement funds, all organized, cataloged, protected. They had trusted me to be responsible. What they hadn't considered was that by putting my name on certain deeds and accounts, they gave me authority they couldn't easily revoke without my cooperation. And so, I exercised that authority. I called the attorney who helped set it up and initiated a freeze on the family trust, citing concerns about asset mismanagement and family conflict. Which meant, in plain terms, that without my cooperation, my parents couldn't sell, transfer, or even borrow against any of their major assets. The fallout was immediate. Within days, I started receiving frantic calls. First my mother, sobbing. Then my father, furious. Daphne, whining about how I was ruining everything. I didn't respond. They had treated me like a ghost at the party. Now they got to see what it felt like when a ghost made decisions. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I wasn't trying to burn bridges for the sake of revenge. I just couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't keep feeding into a family dynamic that only valued me when it was convenient. Weeks passed. Silence stretched between us. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving work, I spotted two familiar figures waiting awkwardly by my office building's front steps. My parents. They looked so small, standing there, mom wringing her hands, dad with his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. It struck me that they were aging, that time was moving on whether I was ready or not. We went to a small diner nearby, the kind with cracked leather booths and sticky tables. We didn't even open the menus. We just sat there, the air between us heavy with things unsaid. Finally, my father spoke. "We were wrong, Fiona," he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered. "We thought, if you were successful, you wouldn't care if they teased you. We thought you didn't need us to defend you." Mom nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We were proud of you, but we didn't know how to show it." The words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had built this armor: ambition, independence, self-sufficiency, all because deep down, I thought I was fundamentally unlovable unless I achieved something extraordinary. And here they were, admitting they hadn't seen me at all. "I don't need your pride," I said finally, my voice thick. "I needed your kindness." We sat there for a long time. No quick fixes. No magical forgiveness. Eventually, I agreed to meet with them and a lawyer to restructure the trust. I wasn't going to let Daphne and Nolan back into anything financial; that door was closed permanently. But I was willing to unfreeze what belonged to my parents, under new conditions that protected my interests too. They accepted. Maybe they realized they had already lost me once. They weren't willing to gamble again. After that meeting at the lawyer's office, things didn't magically get better. There were no hugs, no teary speeches, no sweeping gestures that wrapped everything up with a bow. It was messy. Awkward. Heavy with the weight of years of misunderstandings. For weeks, my parents and I tiptoed around each other. They sent short texts, updates about the garden, a funny story about their neighbor, the new book club my mom had joined. I replied politely but briefly. I didn't know how to bridge the gap, and honestly, part of me didn't even want to yet. It was around this time that Daphne started trying to reach out. At first, it was small things, liking my old Facebook posts, sending a birthday card late, with a scribbled "Hope you're good" inside, like we were casual acquaintances, not sisters. Then one night, I got a text from an unknown number. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Hey Fi. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened at the party. I didn't mean it like that. I miss you. Can we talk?" I put my phone down without replying. Miss me? She missed the version of me that showed up smiling and silent, not the one who stood up and walked away. A few days later, she tried again. This time, it was a long email. She wrote about how stressed she was, about how she and Nolan had been just blowing off steam, how she had been drinking a little that night and wasn't thinking. She wrote about missing the days when we were little and played Barbies under the oak tree in Grandma's backyard. About how she looked up to me even though she never said it. But there was also a sharp edge to it. A line that stuck with me. "I just wish you didn't take everything so seriously." That was it, right there. The fundamental gap between us. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just blowing off steam. It was a pattern. They said cruel things. I was supposed to laugh it off. Play along. Be the cool sister who didn't have needs or feelings. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, curled up on the couch, and let myself feel all of it. The anger, the hurt, the weird hollow grief for a relationship I had wanted to believe in for so long. And for once, I didn't tell myself I was being dramatic. I didn't tell myself I was overreacting. I just sat with it. The next day, another message arrived, this time, a voicemail. Daphne's voice was tight, strained. "Fi, Mom says you're not answering me. I don't know what else you want from me." I apologized, "Okay? Can you just let it go already?" There it was. the old Daphne. The apology was never about understanding, it was about absolution. About making the discomfort go away for her. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. Around that time, my parents invited me out to visit them again. No big event. No party. Just dinner. Low key. It was tempting to say no. To stay tucked in my neat, quiet life, safe behind the walls I had built. But something in me, some stubborn hope I hadn't managed to achieve yet, made me say yes. When I pulled into the driveway of their ranch house, I noticed little things right away. The garden was overgrown. Paint peeled on the porch railings. The house looked tired. My parents were getting older. Slower. Fragile in a way that felt almost offensive, like time itself was betraying them. Mom opened the door with a cautious smile. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, voice soft. Dad hovered behind her, his baseball cap in his hands. We sat on the back deck, nursing iced teas, watching the sun sink behind the trees. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one made jokes at my expense. It was uncomfortable, but it was real. At one point, Mom cleared her throat. "We're trying to be better," she said quietly. "It might take time. But we want to be." I nodded. It was enough for that day. Dinner was simple grilled chicken, corn on the cob, salad. No fancy speeches. No strained apologies. Just small, human moments. Afterward, Mom pulled out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. There we were, Daphne and me, muddy and barefoot after a rainstorm. Dad coaching my soccer team, his hair still black instead of the silver it was now. Mom smiling in a floppy hat, arms thrown around both of us. The nostalgia hurt, sharp and sweet. Somewhere between the pages, between the brittle photo corners and the faded ink, I realized something. I wasn't here to fix things. I wasn't here to make it perfect. I was just here. Alive. Present. And for now, that had to be enough. But the real test, the real confrontation with Daphne and Nolan was still coming. Because you can't just freeze someone out forever without them trying to claw their way back in. And trust me, they tried. A few weeks after that quiet dinner with my parents, just when I thought maybe things had settled into a cautious truce, Daphne decided she wasn't done. It started with small things, packages left at my door. Cookies she and her kids had baked. A scarf she said reminded her of one I wore in college. Little gifts, none of which I asked for, each one wrapped in the bright, forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. I didn't respond. I didn't acknowledge the deliveries. I had made my boundaries clear by my silence, but some people refuse to listen unless you shout. Then one Saturday morning, I heard a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, there she was. Daphne. Arms crossed, eyes a little puffy, a thin line of determination etched into her mouth. I could have pretended not to be home. I could have waited until she gave up. But something in me, some flicker of curiosity, or maybe just sheer exhaustion, made me open the door. We stood there for a moment, staring at each other. Daphne was the first to break the silence. "Hey, Fi," she said, voice light, fake casual. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. I just leaned against the doorframe and waited. She shifted awkwardly, digging her nails into her palm. "Look," she said, voice tightening. "I get it, okay? You're mad. You're hurt. But this is too much. You're freezing out Mom and Dad, you're freezing out me over one stupid comment?" I said nothing. She barreled on. "I mean, we're family. Families fight. Families mess up. You don't just disappear because someone said something dumb at a party." I let the words hang in the air. It was like she was standing in front of a mirror, shouting into her own reflection, expecting it to give her the answer she wanted. Finally, I spoke. "It wasn't one comment," I said quietly. "It was a lifetime." Daphne blinked. "You think, what? That I was always mean to you?" That I hated you or something? I shook my head. No, I said. I think you didn't see me at all. And when you did, you didn't like what you saw. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she was speechless. I wasn't angry because you made a joke, I continued. I was angry because you didn't think twice about doing it. Because you assumed I would just laugh along, like I always did. Because you thought my success made me less human. Daphne shifted, her face flushing. It was a joke, she muttered, but the words sounded smaller now. Weaker. I crossed my arms. You didn't care how it made me feel. You cared that it made you feel clever. And when I walked away, you didn't ask why. You got mad that you had to clean up the mess. She looked away, biting her lip. We stood there in the hallway, two women with decades of resentment and misunderstanding piled between us like invisible bricks. I can't go back to pretending, I said finally. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be real. No more cheap shots. No more laughing at my expense. No more making me the bad guy because you're uncomfortable. Daphne's hands twisted in front of her. I don't know if I can, she started, then trailed off. I nodded. I figured. There was no anger in my voice. No judgment. Just the cold, simple truth. Because the thing no one tells you is, some people can love you and still not know how to respect you. Some people can miss you and still not be able to meet you where you are. And that's not something you can fix for them. Finally, she looked up at me, eyes shining with tears she hadn't let fall. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. You already did, I said, voice steady. This is about whether you're willing to start over. She nodded shakily, wiping at her face. I'll try, she said. I'll believe it when I see it, I replied. And with that, I stepped back inside and closed the door. Not slammed. Not angrily. Just closed. On the other side, I leaned against the wood and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. And it was both terrifying and freeing. For a few days after that confrontation, I waited for the fallout. Daphne wasn't someone who took rejection easily. Part of me braced for the next wave, the guilt texts, the family pressure, the sudden narrative that I was being cold or unreasonable. But nothing came. The silence was louder than any words could have been. In a way, it hurt even more. It would have been easier if she had fought harder, if she had shown up again, angry or desperate. Instead, she disappeared, just like I had. It made it clear that, deep down, maybe she didn't know how to be close to me without the old rules in place. Meanwhile, my parents kept trying, in their quiet, clumsy way. Mom sent me a picture one afternoon of her newly planted vegetable garden, captioned, "Trying to keep busy. Miss you." Dad mailed me a book he thought I'd like, some historical biography about a woman CEO from the early 1900s with a sticky note, "Reminded me of you." It wasn't perfect. It was hesitant and awkward. But it was real effort. And real effort, I was learning, was rare. It mattered more than grand gestures ever could. A few weekends later, I agreed to meet them again, this time at a small coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. I was nervous walking in, scanning the booths for them. Mom spotted me first. She stood up too fast, knocking over her coffee, blushing as she grabbed napkins. Dad chuckled under his breath, helping her mop up the spill. It was such a normal, human moment that something inside me softened a little without my permission. We sat down. For a while, we just talked about safe things, the weather, books, little neighborhood updates. I told them about the new project I was overseeing at work. They listened, really listened, without steering the conversation back to themselves. At one point, Dad set down his coffee cup and looked at me seriously. "I want you to know," he said, "we're proud of you because of who you are. Not just what you've done." Mom nodded fiercely, squeezing my hand across the table. Tears stung my eyes unexpectedly. I blinked them back, nodding. "Thank you," I said, voice hoarse. Because it mattered. Because even if it came late, even if it wasn't perfect, I needed to hear it. We talked for almost 2 hours, more than we had in the past 5 years combined. When it was time to leave, Mom hugged me tight, pressing something small into my hand. It was a photo, an old one, slightly faded. Me at 8 years old, beaming up at the camera, holding a science fair ribbon in one hand and a muddy stuffed animal in the other. On the back, in my mother's careful handwriting, was one sentence: "We loved you before you ever won a thing." I stood there for a long time after they left, staring down at that photo. Feeling something old and brittle inside me finally crack open. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't forgetting. But maybe, just maybe, it was the start of healing. Daphne, though, that was a different story. She stayed quiet for another week after the door incident. Then, without warning, she showed up again. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought her 2 daughters, my niece's girls I hadn't seen in almost a year. I found out when the doorbell rang on a rainy Thursday night. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door cautiously. There she was, rain plastering her hair to her face, 2 shivering little girls in matching pink jackets clutching her hands. She looked miserable. Defeated. "Please," she said simply. I stood there, torn. Anger warred with guilt. Resentment tangled with old, stubborn love. The girls looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes. I stepped back, opening the door. Not for Daphne. For them. They scrambled inside, dripping water everywhere, laughing at the sudden warmth. Daphne followed, looking like she wanted to sink into the floor. I grabbed towels, handing them to the girls, trying not to look at my sister. They chatted easily, showing me their glittery backpacks, telling me about school projects and dance classes. For a few blessed moments, it was just laughter and kid energy filling the space, not tension or old wounds. But when they were distracted coloring at my kitchen table, Daphne finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Not defensive. Not rushed. Just those 2 words, raw and real. I glanced at her. She looked exhausted. Broken down in a way I hadn't seen before. "I don't know how to fix it," she continued. "I don't even know if I can. But I miss you. They miss you." Her voice cracked. "And I'm scared that if I don't figure this out, it'll be too late." I stared at her for a long moment. There was no dramatic music. No movie scene reconciliation. Just 2 adults, battered by life and pride and mistakes, standing on the thin thread of something that could still break either way. Finally, I spoke. "I'm not the same person you used to know," I said. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm not going to pretend anymore," I added. "I don't want you to," she said. And for the first time, I believed her. That rainy night with Daphne and the girls left something cracked open between us, not healed, but exposed. After they left, I sat with my coffee and the silence, weighing everything. I realized something important: forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. Forgiveness is something you give for yourself to clear your heart, to stop carrying the weight. Trust is something people have to earn, brick by brick. And Daphne had a lot of bricks to rebuild. The next few months were cautious. She called, but not too often. She sent updates about the girls without expectation of a reply. She apologized again, short, clear, without excuses, once over lunch when the girls weren't there to distract us. I didn't rush to let her in. I didn't rush to make it easy. Meanwhile, my parents slowly found their footing too. They started showing up for me in small ways, remembering important dates, asking thoughtful questions about my life that didn't center around my job. It was clumsy. It was sometimes awkward. But it was real. That was the line now, real or nothing. As for Nolan, he stayed silent. Apparently, my decision to remove him from any claim to the family trust had hit him where it hurt most: his wallet. Through back channels, mostly through my mother's whispered updates, I learned he had tried to contest the decision, blustering about family rights and unfair treatment. The lawyer laughed him out of the conversation. "You see, I hadn't just frozen the assets temporarily. I had made it permanent, a new legal structure that left the trust airtight, with clear clauses that ensured only my parents and later charitable organizations of their choice would benefit. No cousin, no sister, no extended relative with hurt feelings could touch it. And Nolan? He had counted on that future windfall to fund his new YouTube podcast idea, the one already sinking under debt and bad reviews. Without the trust money, he was stuck. Flailing. Failing. And there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. I didn't gloat openly. I didn't post about it or rub it in his face. My revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet. Solid. Unshakable. I had chosen not to fight them on their battlefield drama, arguments, public scenes. I had built my own battlefield, a legal, protected world where their mockery and entitlement couldn't reach me anymore. And I didn't have to lift a finger. They did it to themselves. The next Christmas, my parents asked if I would come for a small gathering, just them, no extended family. I agreed, cautiously. When I arrived at their house, there was no big production. No fancy dinner. Just the three of us sitting around the living room, a fire crackling, plates of cookies balanced on our laps. Halfway through the night, my mom handed me a gift, a small, carefully wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside were the words, "Seen. Loved. Enough." I swallowed hard. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't trying to earn my place anymore. I had already earned it just by existing. Just by surviving. After dessert, my dad cleared his throat and said, almost shyly, "We rewrote the will. Everything's going to the causes you care about. If anything's left, it's up to you to decide. You deserve that trust." I nodded, emotion thick in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about finally being treated like an adult, an equal, someone worthy of real respect, not just expectations. The next day, Daphne sent a short text. "Merry Christmas, Fi. I hope we can keep building." I replied simply, "One brick at a time." Because that was the truth. I wasn't shutting her out completely. But I wasn't throwing open the gates either. She would have to show up. Consistently. Honestly. And if she didn't? Well, that was her choice to make. I had already made mine. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.